The crystal chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton cast fractured rainbows across a sea of designer gowns and power suits, but Amara Chen felt like she was drowning. Her fingers trembled around the stem of her champagne glass, the bubbles rising like her anxiety. And there he was. Damien. Her ex-boyfriend, the man who had spent 2 years systematically dismantling her self-worth brick by brick until she barely recognized herself anymore. He stood beneath an ornate archway, his arm draped possessively around a willowy red head in gold sequins, but his eyes, those cold predatory eyes, kept drifting to Amara. He wanted her to see him. Wanted her to feel small. The familiar tendrils of panic began wrapping around her chest, squeezing. She needed air. She needed escape. She needed to be anywhere but in his sightline. Her gaze swept desperately across the crowded ballroom and landed on a man standing in the shadows near the terrace doors. He was magnetic in his stillness, a fixed point in the swirling chaos of networking and false laughter. Tall, with the kind of sharp-featured handsomeness that belonged on magazine covers, he wore a black suit tailored with such precision it looked painted on. Korean, she thought, noting the elegant planes of his face and the way he held himself with an economy of movement that suggested absolute control. He cradled a tumbler of scotch, watching the room with the detached interest of a scientist observing lab rats. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He didn't need to. The idea hit Amara like lightning. Insane. Completely insane. But desperation made people do extraordinary things. She smoothed her hands down the sapphire silk of her gown, squared her shoulders, and walked toward him before her rational mind could talk her out of it. Her heels clicked against marble with each step, each one bringing her closer to either salvation or humiliation. He noticed her approach, his dark eyes shifting from the crowd to her face. There was curiosity there, and something else. Intelligence. The kind that missed nothing. She stopped in front of him, suddenly feeling exposed despite being fully clothed. Her carefully constructed corporate persona crumbled like wet sand. When she spoke, her voice came out softer than she intended, almost vulnerable. "This is going to sound completely insane," she began, searching his face for any sign of mockery. "But would you be willing to dance with me? Just one dance. My ex is over there, and he's watching, and I just need him to think I've moved on." She saw his eyes track past her shoulder, finding Damien in the crowd. They lingered there for a heartbeat, too, assessing. Then they returned to her face, and she braced herself for rejection. For a patronizing smile and a polite excuse. Instead, the corner of his mouth lifted in the ghost of a smirk. He set his scotch down on a nearby table with deliberate slowness, then extended his hand toward her. "He's an idiot," the man said, his voice a deep baritone that seemed to resonate in her bones. "I'd be honored." The moment his hand closed around hers, warmth flooded up Amara's arm, short-circuiting the anxious thoughts that had been screaming in her head. He guided her toward the dance floor with confident, unhurried steps, and the crowd seemed to part for him as if he carried his own gravitational field. On the dance floor, he didn't immediately pull her close. Instead, he positioned them with old-fashioned formality, one hand settling at the small of her back, the other cradling her hand like something precious. The orchestra swelled into a waltz, and he began to move. God, he could dance. Really dance. Not the awkward shuffling most men did, but fluid, precise movements that anticipated her every step. He led with subtle pressure, a slight turn of his shoulders, the gentlest guidance of his hand, and Amara found herself moving with a grace she'd never possessed before. It was like floating. Like magic. She looked up at him, really looked, and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wasn't just going through the motions to help a stranger. He was present, focused entirely on her. "Amara," she said, finding her voice again. "My name is Amara." His expression softened, the stern mask cracking to reveal something warmer underneath. "Kai Park," he replied. "And you can breathe, Amara. You're doing perfectly." The simple reassurance hit her harder than it should have. When was the last time anyone had made her feel safe? She let herself relax into his lead, the rigid tension in her spine easing. From the corner of her eye, she caught sight of Linda, her supervisor, watching them with the hungry expression of someone who'd just stumbled onto premium gossip. Amara's stomach clenched, but then Kai spun her unexpectedly, an elegant turn that made her gasp and then laugh. A real laugh, unforced and genuine. When he brought her back, they were closer than before, and she could smell his cologne, something clean and expensive with notes of cedar and bergamot. The song wound toward its conclusion, and Amara felt an unexpected pang of loss. But before the final note could fade, a sneering voice shattered their bubble. "Well, look who found a new victim." Damien materialized beside them, the redhead clinging to his arm. His smile was vicious. "Moving on fast, aren't you, Amara? Guess you really are as desperate as I always said." Amara's throat closed. But before she could even attempt a response, Kai shifted, placing himself slightly between her and Damien. He didn't puff up or raise his voice. He simply stood there, and somehow the air around them grew colder. "I believe," Kai said, his voice dropping to a tone that was all the more dangerous for its calm, "the lady and I were enjoying a private moment." He held Damien's gaze, and Amara watched with shock as genuine fear flickered across her ex's face. Damien laughed, but it sounded hollow. He grabbed the redhead's wrist and stalked away, throwing one last glare over his shoulder. Kai turned back to Amara, his expression immediately gentling. "Are you all right?" She could only nod, too stunned to speak. Who the hell was this man? Monday morning arrived with the sterile fluorescent brightness of the conference room, a harsh contrast to Saturday's glittering ballroom. Amara sat at the massive glass table, her presentation materials organized with obsessive precision, her heart doing gymnastics in her chest. Today was everything. The formal introduction to the executive team from JK Holdings, the Seoul-based conglomerate considering a merger with their firm worth billions. This was her project. She'd spent 8 months leading the research team, crafting the proposal, running the numbers. A successful presentation today meant the vice president of strategic development position she'd been chasing for 3 years. Linda sat across from her, already schmoozing with the existing board members, her smile sharp as a knife. Amara's friend Deshawn shot her a covert fist bump from down the table. The conference room doors opened, and Mr. Patterson, their CEO, walked in beaming. "Good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest, the chairman and CEO of JK Holdings, the man who will ultimately decide the fate of this merger." Amara looked up, professional smile in place, ready to make the best impression of her life. The man who walked in behind Patterson was not the elderly executive she'd been expecting. It was him. It was Kai Park. He wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than her car, his hair styled perfectly, but those eyes, those impossibly perceptive dark eyes, were the same. And they were looking directly at her. Pure horror, hot and consuming, crawled up Amara's spine. The stranger she'd begged to be her fake dance partner. The man she'd confessed her desperation to in a moment of panic. He was the billionaire CEO who held her entire career, her entire future, in the palm of his hand. This wasn't dramatic irony. This was a cosmic practical joke of catastrophic proportions. Kai's expression remained perfectly neutral, but she saw it. The briefest flicker of recognition when their eyes met. He knew. Of course he knew. He took his seat at the head of the table, the throne of power, and the meeting commenced. Amara felt like she was having an out-of-body experience, hearing her own introduction as if from underwater. When her turn came to present the preliminary overview, she walked to the front on legs that felt like they might give out. She could feel his gaze on her, heavy and constant. "Miss Chin was our point person on this proposal," Linda interjected, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "She's quite passionate about her work. We all had such an interesting time at the Ritz-Carlton Gala this weekend, didn't we, Amara?" The barely concealed insinuation hung in the air like poison gas. Amara's face burned, but she met Linda's malicious stare with a steady one of her own before turning back to Kai. She had to salvage this. She took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and began to speak. Her voice wavered for only a moment before finding its strength. She would not be defined by a desperate moment on a dance floor. She would be defined by her work, her intelligence, her competence. The week that followed was a systematic dismantling of everything Amara had built, and Linda's fingerprints were all over it. The first strike came on Tuesday. Amara was preparing to present the revised market analysis, data she'd personally verified twice, when she opened the file to find it corrupted. Not just damaged, completely destroyed, replaced by incomprehensible code. Ice water flooded her veins. This wasn't an accident. She spent the next 40 hours with Deshawn, rebuilding everything from scratch, from raw data files and backup sources. They worked through the night fueled by energy drinks and righteous anger, making the deadline with minutes to spare. Amara presented the resurrected data with dark circles under her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her bones. Kai had been in the room, his face an impassive mask as she walked the board through the numbers. He asked brutal, incisive questions, giving no quarter, but his eyes seemed to linger on her face, as if reading the story of her sleepless nights in the shadows beneath her eyes. The second blow was more personal, more calculated. On Thursday, an email announced the hiring of a new temporary consultant for the merger's brand integration strategy. The consultant was Damien. Amara felt the world tilt when she saw him walking through the office that afternoon, shaking hands, deploying that practice charm like a weapon. Their eyes met across the open workspace, and he gave her a slow, triumphant wink. "Linda's doing, obviously." A strategic missile aimed directly at Amara's composure. Having Damien here, in her professional space, her sanctuary, felt like a violation. Every interaction became a minefield. Every casual hallway conversation turned into an ambush of backhanded comments and false concern. "You look exhausted, Mara," he'd say, leaning against her cubicle wall. "Burning yourself out again? You always did have trouble knowing your limits." He was a living reminder of every manipulation, every gaslighting tactic, every moment she'd doubted herself. The self-doubt she'd fought so hard to bury began clawing its way back to the surface. "She's a snake," Deshawn muttered, glaring toward Linda's office. "And he's the poison she's using. Don't let them break you, Amara. You're twice the professional she'll ever be." Amara tried to focus on the work, documenting everything meticulously, creating paper trails, saving files in multiple cloud locations. She wouldn't be blindsided again. Through it all, she was hyper-aware of Kai Park's presence. He seemed to be everywhere, a silent observer in the back of tense meetings, a brief shared glance in the elevator. He never intervened directly, never offered help. Yet his scrutiny didn't feel threatening. It felt like a test. Like he was waiting to see if she would break. And Amara was determined not to. The breakthrough came late on a Wednesday night. Amara was alone in the office, long after even the most dedicated workaholics had left, combing through server logs with a suspicion she couldn't shake. The official IT report had blamed the file corruption on a power fluctuation, a convenient explanation that felt too neat, too clean. She wasn't a cybersecurity expert, but she was thorough. She cross-referenced the server access timestamps with the building security logs, and there it was. A single login to the financial database at 2:47 in the morning on the night of the corruption. The credentials belonged to a junior associate in Linda's department, a nervous kid who was terrified of his boss. But the security logs showed that associate's keycard hadn't accessed the building after 6 o'clock that evening. Another keycard had, though. Accessed their floor at 2:43 and left at 2:51. Linda's keycard. It wasn't ironclad proof. Linda could claim she was working late and the associate had left his computer logged in. But it was a thread, and when pulled, Amara suspected it would unravel everything. The next morning, the tension between Amara and Linda was electric, crackling in the air between them. Linda watched her with narrowed eyes, as if she could sense Amara circling closer to the truth. The final puzzle piece arrived that afternoon via interoffice mail. An unmarked manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a USB drive. Deshawn stood guard while Amara plugged it into her laptop. It contained a single audio file, no label, no metadata. She pressed play, and Linda's voice filled the silence, sharp and vindictive. "He's a tool, Damien. Do exactly what I tell you. Rattle her. Make her seem unstable, emotional. When I get the VP position after this merger closes, I'll make sure you're very well compensated for your consulting work." The conspiracy wasn't speculation anymore. It was evidence. Later that day, a calendar invitation appeared in Amara's inbox. Merger status review, it read. The meeting was with Kai Park. In his office. Alone. Her heart climbed into her throat. She walked into his penthouse office, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's skyline, feeling a dizzying mix of dread and electric anticipation. He stood by the window, much like he had at the gala, a solitary figure of power against the glittering urban backdrop. "Miss Chin." "Amara," he said, turning to face her. The corporate formality had evaporated, replaced by something more direct, more personal. "Tell me what's really happening." It wasn't an accusation. It was an invitation, a test of trust. She looked at this powerful, enigmatic man, the man who'd held her on a dance floor and now held her future in his hands. She had the USB drive in her bag, evidence that could either save her or destroy her. She took a breath. "It's complicated," she began, her voice steady. He took a step closer, the space between them shrinking, charged with their shared history. "I'm not afraid of complicated," Kai said, his voice low and resonant. "I value the truth. Show me." In that moment, she knew. He wasn't just another corporate executive. He was an ally. And the game had just changed. With the USB drive feeling like a grenade in her bag, Amara stepped further into the vast, minimalist office. The city sprawled below like a circuit board, lights beginning to flicker on as dusk approached. She met Kai's steady gaze, that dark anchor in the storm of her anxiety. This was a gamble. A leap of faith based on a dance, a handful of glances, and an instinct that the man before her was different. He valued truth, he'd said. She would give it to him, unfiltered and raw. She walked to the sleek desk between them and placed the small drive on its glass surface. It landed with a soft click that echoed in the quiet room. "Linda has been sabotaging me since the merger was announced," Amara stated, her voice clear, devoid of the tremor she'd feared. "She sees me as an obstacle to the promotion she believes is her birthright." She laid it all out chronologically. The corrupted financial projections and the impossibility of a random glitch. Her discovery in the server logs and security records, the digital breadcrumbs leading directly to Linda's late-night visit. She told him about Damien, about his strategic appearance as a consultant, about the calculated campaign of psychological warfare that followed. Kai listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, but she could see a muscle tightening in his jaw. When she finished, he picked up the drive, turning it over in his elegant fingers. "And this?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "This," Amara said, her resolve hardening, "is a recording of Linda instructing Damien to make me appear unstable and promising to pay him off once she secures the promotion." Kai stood motionless for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the drive. Then he looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw the ice in his eyes melt, replaced by a controlled, dangerous heat. Not pity. Fury. In my world, Amara, he said, his voice dangerously soft, loyalty is everything. Betrayal is unforgivable. He paused. I knew something was wrong. The sheer number of last-minute crises surrounding your work was statistically improbable. I don't believe in bad luck. I believe in resilience. I was waiting to see how you'd handle it. He walked around the desk, closing the distance until he stood just feet away. You haven't disappointed me. Relief so profound it nearly buckled her knees washed over Amara. He believed her. He'd seen her struggle, and he'd been waiting for her to fight back. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He gave her a sharp, predatory smile that was both terrifying and thrilling. Now, he said, we let her dig her own grave. And then we bury her in it. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its execution. They would proceed as if Amara had never spoken to him, as if she were still struggling, isolated, on the verge of collapse. The final merger approval meeting was scheduled for the following Friday, and Kai decreed that Linda and Amara would deliver a joint presentation. She'll expect you to fail, Kai explained during one of their covert late-night planning sessions in his deserted office. She'll try to position herself as the hero who saved the deal from your incompetence. We'll give her every opportunity to do exactly that. Over the next week, Amara played the part of a woman unraveling. She let Damien's barbs seem to land, feigning frustration. She appeared flustered in team meetings, allowing Linda to publicly correct her on trivial points, watching the smug triumph bloom on the older woman's face. It was exhausting, draining, having to pretend to be weak. But the knowledge that Kai was her silent partner, a powerful unseen force watching from the shadows, gave her a strength she'd never known. Their strategy sessions became the anchor of her week. After the office emptied, she'd take the private elevator to the penthouse floor. There, surrounded by financial models and merger documents, they would work. The city lights their only witnesses. The line between professional and personal began to blur in those quiet hours. He would order dinner, and they'd eat from takeout containers on his billion-dollar desk, conversation drifting from market analysis to their pasts. She learned he'd built his empire from the ruins of his family's failed company, that his quiet demeanor masked a relentless, almost obsessive drive. He, in turn, drew out her story, not just of Damien but of her ambitions, her dreams, the fire that drove her. One night, as she was gathering her things to leave, shoulders aching with exhaustion, he stopped her. You're doing well, he said, his voice softer than usual. This isn't easy. I just want it to be over, she confessed, looking up at him. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. He was standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing a fallen eyelash from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent electricity through her entire body. His fingers lingered, a silent question passing between them. The air grew thick, charged. Soon, he promised, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. He dropped his hand, and the moment broke, but the electricity of it remained, humming under her skin all the way home. The trap was set, the players positioned. And for the first time, Amara wasn't afraid. She was ready. The night before the final presentation, anticipation hung in the air like static before a storm. Amara had rehearsed her part of the presentation countless times, her notes memorized, her counterarguments prepared. Yet nervous energy still thrummed beneath her skin. Just as she was preparing to call it a night, her phone buzzed. A text from Kai. Are you ready for tomorrow? She smiled. As ready as I'll ever be. A moment later, I'm downstairs. Let me buy you a drink. You've earned it. Her heart did a somersault. She found him parked in a sleek black car that looked like it cost more than her annual salary. He wasn't wearing one of his intimidating power suits, but a simple black cashmere sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. He took her to a quiet jazz club, a hidden gem tucked down an unmarked alley. The pretense of business evaporated, replaced by an easy intimacy that felt both new and strangely familiar. "I have a confession," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "The night of the gala, I knew who you were." Amara froze, her glass halfway to her lips. "You did?" He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "I make it my business to know everything about the key players in a deal of this magnitude. I'd read your file. I knew you were the lead on the proposal." I was intrigued. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "And then this beautiful, incredibly brave woman in a blue dress walked up to me and asked me to dance because her ex was watching. How could I possibly refuse?" Amara felt heat creep up her neck. All this time, she'd thought she was a complete stranger to him, a random face in the crowd. But he'd been watching her all along. "You were testing me," she realized aloud. "From the very beginning." "I was," he admitted, his eyes holding hers. "I needed to know if the brilliant strategist on paper had the spine to survive in a room full of sharks." He paused. "You've proven you're not just a survivor, Amara. You're a force." The word hung in the air between them, shimmering with meaning. After the bar, he drove her home. The comfortable silence in the car was filled with everything they hadn't said. He walked her to the entrance of her apartment building, the cool night air wrapping around them. Under the soft glow of the entrance light, he stopped, turning to face her fully. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice a low, serious murmur, "you take back your power. You show them all exactly who you are. You do it with grace and with fire." He reached up, cupping her face in his hands, his touch gentle but firm. "But tonight, just be Amara." And then he kissed her. It wasn't tentative or questioning. It was a kiss of certainty, of pent-up admiration and deep, simmering passion. It tasted of scotch and promises. A kiss that silenced every remaining doubt in her mind and set her soul on fire. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathless. "Get some rest," he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "You have a war to win in the morning." The main conference room felt like a coliseum. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes floating in the tense air. The entire board was assembled, along with Patterson, Damien, Linda, and Amara. Kai sat at the head of the long table, a silent, imposing judge presiding over the proceedings. Linda began the presentation, her voice smooth and confident. She was in top form, weaving a compelling narrative of the merger's potential, seamlessly incorporating Amara's research as if it were her own. Amara stood beside her, playing her part, appearing slightly nervous and deferential. She could feel Damien's smug gaze on her from across the table. The trap sprung halfway through. "While the overall projections are exceptionally strong," Linda said, adopting a tone of grave concern, "I would be remiss if I didn't bring a potential issue of internal security to the board's attention." She clicked to a new slide showing a fabricated email chain. In it, Amara appeared to be communicating with a competitor, sharing sensitive merger data. "I discovered this late last night," Linda said, her voice dripping with false regret. "It appears Miss Chen's personal struggles, which we've all witnessed, may have led to a catastrophic lapse in judgment." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Patterson looked at Amara, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. Damien leaned back in his chair, a triumphant smirk spreading across his face. This was it. The moment of her execution. Amara felt a strange calm settle over her. She looked at Kai, who gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. "That's a very serious accusation, Linda," Amara said, her voice ringing with confidence, cutting through the stunned silence. She walked to the podium, taking control of the presentation. "And it's a very clumsy fabrication." With a click of her own remote, she brought up her own slide, showing the email's metadata and technical information. As you can see from the IP address and timestamp data, that email didn't originate from my computer, but from a terminal in the marketing department. Specifically, the one assigned to our temporary consultant, Mr. Hayes. Damien's smirk vanished, replaced by pale shock. Amara didn't stop. She methodically, clinically dismantled every lie. She presented her documented evidence, the server logs, the security access records, the restored original financial models showing Linda had been subtly altering numbers to inflate her own department's contributions. The conference room was utterly silent, transfixed. Linda hasn't just been trying to discredit me, Amara said, her eyes locking on her tormentor. She's been actively sabotaging this merger for personal gain. For the final blow, she looked directly at Kai. With your permission, Mr. Park, I have one final piece of evidence. He nodded. Amara pressed a button, and the audio file from the USB drive played through the conference room speakers. Linda's voice, sharp and venomous, filled the room. He's a tool, Damien. Do exactly what I tell you. Rattle her. Make her seem unstable, emotional. The sound of Linda's treachery, raw and undeniable, was her undoing. Her face crumpled, the mask of professional composure shattering. Patterson shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. Security, he roared. The confrontation was over. The war was won. In the chaotic aftermath, as security escorted a sputtering Linda and a terrified Damien from the building, a sense of surreal victory settled over Amara. Deshawn rushed to her side, wrapping her in a fierce, triumphant hug. Colleagues who'd previously kept their distance now offered congratulations and admiration. Even Patterson approached her, his expression a mixture of shame and respect. Miss Chin, Amara, he said heavily. I am deeply sorry. I misjudged you, and I allowed this to happen under my watch. Amara accepted his apology with a grace that surprised even herself. An hour later, she stood once more in Kai's office. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a quiet, bone-deep satisfaction. He was behind his desk, signing documents with swift, decisive strokes. When he finished, he set the pen down and looked at her, his dark eyes warm with an emotion she was beginning to recognize as pride. The final merger documents, he said simply. It's done. He stood and walked over to her, stopping just before her. I've also just approved a significant promotion. Vice President of Strategic Development, heading the entire merger integration. The position is yours, Amara. You've more than earned it. A tear of pure joy escaped her eye, and she quickly brushed it away. Thank you, Kai. He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his entire face. The thanks are all mine. You saved this deal and exposed corruption within this company. He closed the remaining space between them, his hands finding her waist. The professional business was concluded. This was personal. I told you he was an idiot, he murmured, his voice a low, intimate rumble, echoing his words from the night they met. He saw a beautiful woman. He never saw the diamond. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a soft, tender kiss that spoke of respect, admiration, and a deep, burgeoning love. So, she whispered against his mouth, playful curiosity in her voice, this whole mysterious, powerful CEO thing. Is that all there is? Or should I be worried about hostile takeovers in more than just the business sense? Kai chuckled, a rich, warm sound that vibrated through her. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her in a possessive, protective embrace. Let's just say, he whispered, his eyes dancing with dangerous, captivating light, my family has always been very persuasive. And I always get what I want. He kissed her again, deeply, passionately. And as she melted into his embrace, looking out at the endless city lights stretching before them, Amara knew she'd finally found her own empire. If you enjoyed this story of corporate intrigue, redemption, and unexpected romance, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more captivating tales of love, power, and second chances. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story, and let us know in the comments what kind of romance you'd like to hear next. Your support means everything, and we can't wait to bring you more unforgettable stories.